So the aspect of my life that I like applied it to was sustainability because I am switching majors to environmental science from nursing, and I just like grew up in a household like I like thrift 100% of my clothes. We do like composting, gardening, like rainwater harvesting stuff. So I just kind of decided that it would be cool for learning about real life application to apply it to something that was really important to my life and figure out, how I can interact like when I'm doing that stuff or like teaching about sustainability in the clubs that I'm in and just kind of learn, how to, I guess, like morally act when I'm doing that kind of stuff. What about you?
I chose a like definitely more specific aspect of life to apply to the philosophical concept, and it was like the fact that you should be like kind and like willing to help people and like assume best intentions, but you should never allow yourself to be vulnerable or like um have yourself out there so that you'll get hurt yourself. So you should keep in mind that like not everyone has good intentions, but so you need to protect yourself and like not be a fool or like just like throw like common sense to the side and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I chose to do something more specific as opposed to something like more general just because I thought it was interesting like how specific that concept was in Zhuangzi. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. I really do think that's like interesting how stuff that we're learning about that I like don't even think is applicable because honestly sometimes I look at philosophy as like, well, this just sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, but there's like actually so much that's like actually important about it. Um, let's see.
How
Um,
would you say that your understanding of this concept developed over the different stages of this project?
um, well, like through the project, I related it to the concept of the master of the basics, which being a master of the basics, and just like the steps into doing that, because I like my major kind of requires me to, work in a business like with environmental science and to ultimately like teach people and kind of practice what I learned. So, um, I guess just like the aspects of being a master of the basics are kind of like preparing myself, like learning as much as I can, and then learning how to share that with others. And so I think, like, through the project and kind of gaining that understanding, I'm like realizing the importance of like actually knowing like what I'm doing and being intentional with what I'm like teaching and like focusing on like the details of stuff that I'm doing that are really that like would really be important if I were teaching it to somebody else, and then just kind of learning like the steps that I need to be able to teach people, like building relationships with them first. And like I talked about being intentional with like what I'm saying and what I'm doing, and just, and like the business that I have is just like encouraging me to be truthful and in my business to share information, like rather than just like having consumers and just like selling them stuff, but maybe to like engage with them more, and you'd be like, hey, like my business like is focused on sustainable practices. Do you want to learn more about it? And just like letting consumers know like more about like what goes into the process of that.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I'd say for my project, I don't think that I necessarily like act different or anything like that because I think that's pretty constant. That's like I was like that since the start. Like, not that I don't trust people, but like I do make sure that I'm like personally sound and like not open for like harm, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I think it definitely makes me like think more and like analyze what I'm doing and like analyze situations more because I do tie it back to that and like what the master said and whatnot. And like I guess like whenever people ask me things, I'm not as quick to agree. Like I think things through and definitely put more thought into it than before. And I'm definitely like more aware of the gravity of each situation and taking
Mm-hmm.
things seriously and like understanding the consequences that like either way that I make the decision, like whether to help or not. And so like I really like the way that like the metaphor that was used in the text and it was like um the gentleman can be enticed but not trapped. He can be tricked but not duped. So it's like you're always open to some level of like risk and stuff like that. But if you're just like ignorant and like not paying any attention, then it's kind of like partially yourself to blame. So I think I definitely take that into account when like situations arise.
Nice. Yeah, that's interesting, like how you just kind of thought about that like specific aspect. And because I think that, I don't know, I think a lot of people go through that, like learning like when to open up, like when to be vulnerable, and just kind of like considering other people's like intent. That's a really hard thing to do. So I think that was really, really interesting to say. In part D, I'm reading yours. So
Yeah, I'm reading
it
it
says,
right now.
it says, particularly is there an issue with morality of protecting yourself from others? Malintent causes another person's destruction. How would you answer that question now?
I think it's still similar to what I kind of said in part D of the stage one, because I said like given the complexity of life, I don't think there's a single answer. Like I think you'd have to take it on like a situation by situation basis. So like I think you just would have to compare the like severity of each harm. So like if you only have to take a little bit of harm to avoid someone else's like a lot of harm, then I definitely think you should do that. So I feel like in like when it's a lose-lose situation, so like either way someone's going to get harmed, you just do whichever way there's the least harm overall, regardless of who it's to. Because I think if you're only considering yourself, then that's kind of selfish, and I don't think that that's morally correct. You said, what defines a master of the basics, and how do you know that what you're teaching holds truth, and how is truth defined?
Oh no.
How would you define that?
Okay, that is such a broad question. But I mean, I think just, especially when we're learning about Wu Wei, that kind of, is that Wu Wei, I guess? Just kind of learning about that, and like to where like the cook became to a point where he just skillfully did it like without having to, like second guess himself, and it was just like all kind of in accordance with the way and like how he was supposed to be acting. So I think that is kind of like that you're a master when you like don't have to second guess yourself. You're like confident in what you know. And I think like another kind of important aspect of being a master is also like being a teacher, so being able to like know your stuff, but then to also like teach it and explain it to others, because then that will kind of enhance like your like what you've learned. And then on the question about what was it, what is truth, how do you define
how do you define truth?
Okay. That's literally impossible to answer. I think because like what I wrote about was scientific. So I think that there is like, science is mostly like objective stuff. It's very like fact based and evidence through experiments. So I think truth like in science, has like a definite like, that water goes through the water cycle, like that's a true, like we all know that because there's proof, there's evidence, experiments for it. So I think in terms of like what I'm talking about, that would be how I would define truth in terms of like how certain sustainable practices work, like what I don't know, it's like green engineering, just like thinking about how all that kind of stuff like works. That's how I would define truth in that context. But it's very hard to define truth in any other context, especially in philosophical context. Expect to achieve by the end of the project.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so like how do you think you've changed in terms of like analyzing your situations and like how you respond to them, and have your goals changed?
Okay, let me think about this.
Sorry.
Okay. I feel like I've already said this, but like I think just being more patient and like thinking things through and just being more analytical. So just like trying to consider all aspects of the situation and not just surface level, and like not looking just short term but also the long term implications of my actions. So I think just like overall just to like be more thoughtful and to like just like consider what I'm getting into when I do things, because even though like the action or what I'm saying might seem small or insignificant, it could have a rippling effect and have some like major consequences in the future.
Do you have any more goals for your, I know it's hard to say because like you've talked about like analyzing your situations before. Do you think there's like any, like do you have any, well, I guess this is like one of the questions that I think I asked in your video was like a specific example, like how would you is like if it's not too personal, you know? Like just I mean, because I feel like even mine too, like, oh, sustainability, like this whole big thing, but like what's more of a like specific application, I guess. Like do you have an example like school or like friend, just like
I don't know if
overall?
it's specific, but like I guess it's more specific than what I was saying before. But like I'm the kind of person that says yes to everything because I have a really hard time saying no to people. So sometimes when I say yes and agree and like help other people, it causes me to get distracted. Like so maybe I won't be able to get my work done or like it'll be a time crunch or something. So I think I could definitely work on putting myself first in that case because I'm causing myself harm by procrastinating or like not putting my own needs first. So like I mean, I don't have anything specific. I think it happens pretty often that I say yes to other people,
but it's like some like sacrificing your like schoolwork to hang out with friends who are kind of like, yeah, I think that kind of ties into peer pressure a little bit, you know, like
yeah.
but yeah, I understand where you're coming from.